All right, let's talk about Resto Druid. So first off, let's just talk about changes. Um, all the classes in Midnight have been getting a lot of pruning, right? They've been having some reduction of abilities. And for some of them, that's resulted in simply cutting down on the number of buttons, but keeping kind of the same playstyle and functionality the same. And others, it's meant kind of wholesale removal of things. In the case of Resto Druid, we're actually mostly in that first camp. We're generally keeping a lot of what we had before while just losing buttons and having things folded into other things and combined with other buttons. So there's kind of getting to do a lot of the same stuff, but having less keybinds required, which for Resto Druid is very good. Resto Druid may have actually been one of the highest keybind classes in the game. I normally play with about 4 bars, and once you're talking about potions and macros and all these other things, there's a lot of stuff you have to have on the screen. And that's before you even consider the extra action bars you get from shapeshifting. So if you were a person who really liked Resto Druid, or regardless of whether you liked it or not, you just hated how many buttons you have, guess what? Already starting off with some good news, because we're losing several buttons right off the bat. So what are we losing? First off, technically you don't always lose it, but efflorescence, if you don't take this talent life treading, you'll still have efflorescence, but more than likely you're going to take life treading just because it's a great talent. And if you do, what it does is it makes your efflorescence now just spawn below the targets of your life bloom. And if I'm correct, I don't even think you can cast efflow anymore. No. So once you take that talent, it just won't even let you cast it. So if we're out here, we have a healing dummy, cast a life bloom, there's your efflow. Next, Grove Guardians. So Grove Guardians used to be its own button, and it was a little awkward. It was off the global cooldown, and that just kind of required a little bit of APM, and wasn't always the most fun button to press, even if the trees are pretty cool. Well, now it is not a button anymore. It is attached to Swift Mend and Wild Growth. That does mean for some builds it's going to be harder to get 3 of them out at a time. You're probably mostly just going to have 1 or 2 just sort of casually rolling in and sort of consistently there. But you could potentially do something like Prosperity, the talent that gives you 2 Swift Men charges. Maybe just, blast out a whole bunch of Grove Guardians all at once. I like that change personally because I do like the trees, but I hated the tree button. I hated the Grove Guardians button. So I'm actually very happy with this change. Okay. Next, some other small things. There was a talent that for a long time was almost automatically included, and then over time just got less and less powerful, and that was Cenarian Ward. That was usually right up here at the top of the tree. That's just not an option anymore. And as you'll notice, not only the removal of buttons, but the removal of HOTS in general is kind of a theme here. That leads into maybe the next big class change to kind of talk about here, is that they wanted to just lower the amount of HOTS, heal over time spells, that you have access to. And as a result, they've also made base mastery a little bit stronger, including in that first HOT that you place on the target. I don't really have any good math to show you here, but just trust that, generally speaking, mastery is doing the same thing, but just with less required HOTS. I think that's really great. We're going to see how that pans out with how it feels in raid. I'm not a huge raider, but I do know that most Resto Druids could feel a little bit bogged down by just how many HOTS you have on the screen and how much to keep track of. This should be a welcome change and make it so that it's a little bit more readable and make it so that you have to do a little bit less work to get like a reasonable effect. Okay, what else is going on? Well, a lot of our base abilities are just stronger now. There's less of a need to, set up a whole bunch of things in order to make something powerful. Probably the biggest example of that is Wild Growth is now relatively strong on its own. Again, it's hard to really show numbers here, but if you compare it to a Rejuvenation, right, 12,000 over 15 seconds, this is doing 10,000 over 7 seconds to a whole group. So it's basically like almost a single rejuvenation and power level, coming out even a little bit faster in terms of how long it takes to heal and hitting your whole group. Well, your whole M plus group, right? Or 6 or 7 members in a raid or whatever. Definitely pretty powerful. Next, in the last expansion or two, you've probably seen regrowth get more and more powerful, and that's staying the same mostly. So, probably the first big change, that's a bit of a removal. The ability down here, I can't remember the name of it, but it started as a tier set, and it made it so that when you casted a clear casted regrowth, you would also get these little relatively large heals on some nearby allies. That's gone. So that whole Life Bloom build that was really based around just rolling as many Omens of Clarity as you possibly could, and then using those clear casted regrowths to heal onto other things, that's gone, which is a bummer, but you'll see in a little bit when we talk about the new power of the Archdruid how some of that power has been kind of retained and put into a different place. Now, that said, we still have some pretty powerful regrowths, and I think regrowth is now standing as a really solid option that sort of combines the rejuvenation playstyles and the Life Bloom playstyles. Some of the talents that help do that, well, we still have Abundance down here. That's always going to be a great and powerful raid option. We now have talents like Nature's Bounty, where regrowth heals all other allies with regrowth for 40% of its healing. I think that's going to make scenarios where in big burst windows or big high damage situations, if you don't have a Tranquility up or a Tree of Life, or in maybe both scenarios when you just have a lot of healing to do in a long period of time, you'll be spamming regrowths on a whole bunch of other people. Probably if you're in a rejuve build with Abundance up and just getting these rapid fire regrowths that are healing for a ton of health. We still have targets or abilities like Rampant Growth, which is where regrowth healing over time is increased by 100% and also applies to the target of your Life Bloom. And then, not listed here on the talents, but just the base healing of regrowth has been increased. So the initial heal right now is at 18,000. And again, comparing that to a rejuvenation, which is just shy of 12,000 over here, it's quite powerful. The heal over time is a lot lower, though. It's really almost like a healing touch if you want to go way back into the Druid life. There's much less emphasis now on this being sort of a half heal over time, half just single target heal. This is really a powerful, mostly single target heal that it also gives a little bit of a hot, but that's mostly there just to help your mastery. Okay, so what are some other things that have changed here? Well, going back to our Life Bloom build, Life Bloom has had not too many changes, except one particularly large one worth talking about, which is that the talent Undergrowth, which usually would be about right here and allowed you to cast 2 different Life Blooms on 2 different targets, that's gone. We're going to retain a little bit of AoE or multi-target healing functionality with Life Bloom in our Apex talent, but Life Bloom is now strictly 1 target at a time. This is probably a good time to talk about our Apex talent, though. So what do we have? Well, it's called Everbloom at all 3 levels. That's a weird thing about the Apex talents is they have the same name, but there's just 4 talent points worth of the ability. So at first rank, we have Life Bloom stacks every 5 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Now, that's a little bit unclear in what it does. So basically, here's how it works. If you cast a single Life Bloom right there, after 5 seconds, you'll see it'll automatically just double itself, but it's going to stay on that timeline. And then there it goes to triple. It's got 3 stacks now. There's just 3 Life Blooms healing all on from that one button press. You can press it once and forget about it and it'll go. On the other hand, if you want to quickly put a whole bunch of healing on one person. I don't know if this is actually going to be worthwhile to do, but theoretically, you can also just cast Life Bloom 3 times and you'll have 3 stacks, and it'll be doing the whole duration with 3 stacks. So that will probably also play into our verdancy, which is, when Life Bloom blooms, up to 3 targets within your efflorescence are healed for 2,286, that little burst of healing. There's probably going to be some little extra gameplay there with keeping the stacks high and using our Life Bloom to trigger blooms to heal everybody else. All right, the second rank, 30% of Life Bloom's healing splashes onto 2 allies within 30 yards. That's kind of the big deal here, because we lost the ability to have multiple Life Blooms going, and this makes sure that Life Bloom builds can continually heal groups of people outside of just throwing rejuves on everybody, and outside of wild growth windows. We'll have to see how effective that is. It definitely seems more tuned for like a M+ environment, although maybe there's some priority healing, kind of targeted healing builds for raid for certain fights and things like that. Finally, the last rank of our Apex talent, the last rank of Everbloom, is Life Bloom bursts into a blooming frenzy when you consume Soul of the Forest, causing it to bloom 5 times in rapid succession. So, Soul of the Forest, just as a quick reminder, that's whenever you cast Swift Mend, you get this ability. And by the way, that's going to be worth talking about in a second. But strictly speaking for this, so we cast our Life Bloom, we got the Life Bloom going, we got 3 stacks. I'm going to make sure I have a Rejuve on here so that I can Swift Mend it. And we Swift Mend right around there. So now it should be causing it to bloom in succession here. Boom, 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 boom. You see all the Life Blooms going off right now. All the blooms. There's a bloom. And then, of course, with the second rank of Everbloom, it's going to be splashing onto allies. So it makes Life Bloom really a really powerful button with a lot of different interactions. Already was, incredibly powerful before, but with this Apex, it's definitely going to make some interesting, I think probably mostly M+ builds, and be really powerful. Next, I said we were going to talk about Soul of the Forest. So the ability is still the same. At first rank, or not first rank, but by itself, it's basically doing the same thing where you use Swift Mend and then your next healing spell gets a little bit of a bonus. It used to apply to Wild Growth. It no longer does that. It's now only Regrowth or Rejuvenation, and it increases them by 60%. However, there is now a second talent, Power of the Archdruid. Used to be a capstone down here that made it so that you had a chance to add extra rejuves and regrowths on Swift Mends and things like that. Now that has been changed where it applies to your Soul of the Forest, which is to say, if you take this talent, Soul of the Forest and Power of the Archdruid, you're basically making it so that your Swift Mends make it so that your next regrowth or rejuvenation do 60% more healing and apply to 2 additional targets. So let me say that one more time. You get these 2 talents, Soul of the Forest, Power of the Archdruid. Swift Mend will make your next regrowth or rejuvenation heal for 60% more and apply that extra powerful regrowth rejuvenation to 2 other targets. This is going to be worth it for, I think, all forms of Resto Druid. It is a very powerful combination, being able to use a Swift Mend, heal that off, and then you're passing 3 super powerful regrowths onto your team, or 3 super powerful rejuves. That's really, really powerful. Combined with maybe taking Prosperity so that you have 2 extra Swift Mend charges, and renewing Surge, which is where the cooldown of Swift Mend is reduced by up to 40% based on what you do. I think there's going to be a build for probably raid rejuvenation builds, if I had to take a guess, where you are, sorry, let me get out of combat here, where you're really using a lot of Swiftmends and using that as a way of getting rejuvenations spread across as many people as you possibly can and getting them out fast. Night. I'm particularly interested in what rejuvenation builds are going to look like, if at all, in Midnight because of this Apex talent. And that's, if I had any criticism of it, is that it is specifically a Life Bloom only talent. Now, there are Life Bloom builds, Life Bloom raid builds in War Within, but generally speaking, rejuvenation seems to be the more popular raid healing spec. And by having an Apex talent that only focuses on Life Bloom, not only does that really only focus on sort of one aspect of what Resto Druid does, but it seems to kind of go against their philosophy that they stated with Apex talents, that they really want everybody to be able to pick them up. And I can't show you because I'm apparently locked in combat, but I decided to mess around with this idea of, well, what if instead of trying to figure out a way to make Everbloom work in a raid rejuvenation build, what if a rejuvenation build just doesn't even take the Apex talent, and just because there's a lot of rejuvenation talents that you can take, and it always seemed like you were missing out on a few. So I'll see if I can get that up in a second, but basically you can get almost all these talents down here in the bottom right corner, right? You're getting abundance for your rapid fire regrowths. You're getting thriving vegetation, which makes it so that your first rejuvenation tick automatically heals for about 30%, and of course is increasing the duration of regrowth. The Nature's Dormancy, which allows your rejuvenations to last for a longer period of time. And then of course Germination, where you can put 2 rejuves on a single target. You can get all those. You can also get over here Regenesis that increases your rejuvenation by 30%, and then still find a little bit of space to get something like Reforestation, so you have super frequent trees, you being a tree, Incarnation Tree of Life. And combined with the new ability to have regrowths and rejuvenations, powerful rejuvenations, be spread after a Swiftmend, I think it's going to be possible to kind of maintain that throwing rejuves on as many people as possible, and then having those rapid fire regrowths. We'll have to see what happens. It could be an interesting case where you don't take the Apex talent, and that actually makes for an interesting build. We'll have to see what happens. All right, next, let's talk about our hero talents. Neither of these have changed significantly at all. If you liked them before or didn't like them before, I don't think your experience is going to change. The main gameplay difference I think that's going to happen is maybe with Keeper of the Grove, and that's only because there's no button anymore. You're just getting your Grove Guardians through Wild Growths and Swiftmends. So as I said before, that's going to make it a little bit harder to have 3 Grove Guardians out at once in any time that you want to have a huge healing power window. But I think you'll pretty consistently have always 1 or 2, and you won't have to think so much about it. There's a little bit less cognitive load to make sure you're actually getting the benefit of those. I know sometimes in a fight gets really hairy, you might not be thinking about that Grove Guardian button because there's just so many other things you're thinking about. Now you're always getting that power without having to consciously be thinking about it. So in that sense, it's a little bit of a buff. Maybe make it easier to focus on more complex things. Most of the other talents here, nothing particularly interesting. Just things that are leaning into what we already had. Things that are leaning into what we already had. The same can be true of Wildstalker, although actually I guess there's one very important thing I did not mention earlier, which is that Resto Druid, specifically Resto Druid, not all Druids, just Resto, as well as every healer that isn't Shaman, is losing their kick. In this case, Resto Druid loses their Skull Bash. The button is normally, I want to say right here, or maybe right here. It just straight up disappears when you turn into Restoration Druid. You have no access to it. Now, that's not strictly a change for Wildstalker, but there are many druids who wanted to be more of a caster druid and just really stick in Keeper of the Grove form. And they would reluctantly take Skull Bash for M plus and other group environments so that they could, get those kicks in. But it always just felt so clunky when you really wanted to be casting your Star Surges, your Moonfires, and Sunfires. Now you don't have to do that. Strictly speaking, your Keeper of the Grove, you can go into spell damage and stay in caster form or Moonkin form. And then Wildstalker still has the access of Cat Weaving, which will still be pretty good damage for sure. It just won't have the option to do Skull Bash. Won't have the option to do Kick. Although you will always have access to Maim. Maybe that means Maim is now something worth taking for the Wildstalker builds. That stun over here, sort of the cat form version of Kidney Punch. Overall, I think this is a really good set of changes. And so far from what I'm seeing among the Resto community, they tend to agree. There's a few things that are gonna, we'll need to wait and see. And obviously, we're not even looking at numbers of healing right now. This is so early in beta that, things are gonna change wildly as the expansion goes on and as testing goes on. But I think this is an example of pruning done really, really well. There were some classes that seemed to have almost everything removed, and that was not just buttons, but also functionality and ability to do those things. Resto Druid is basically losing no functionality, actually gaining a little bit more, and in some areas anyway, and just having the buttons and cognitive load reduced. Given that Resto Druid is one of the both highest skill caps classes and also historically one of the highest bars of entry in order to start, healing with Resto Druid, I think this is a really great change. It's going to remain, in my opinion, or at least early guess, I think it'll still be one of the hardest healers to master, but it'll be so much easier to start with Resto Druid, and so much of what you had to think about is gone for you. You also can, if you want to stick just in caster form, since Cat Weaving can be a whole nother level of mastery, you can go Keeper of the Grove, not worry about the fact that you are not using Skull Bash, and whenever you do decide to deal any damage, you're not having to shift forms if you don't want to, other than maybe Moonkin form, but that's a much smaller loss than not going into cat form for Cat Weaving. There's a few other things that we didn't go over here, like how Flourish has been sort of melded into Tranquility and whatnot, but I don't think that's worth going over for right now. This is just really meant to be broad strokes on how I think the class is overall going to play. I would say my only concern, as I said before, is how rejuvenation builds are going to look and if they're going to be able to compete. I think they will, but it is a bummer that our Apex talent only affects Life Bloom, and it does make me a little bit worried that rejuvenation is going to be able to get the love that it needs. Okay, let's talk about balance. So if you like current balance, you will probably be happy because this is more or less the same talent tree. There's going to be some slight differences in how it plays, which we'll kind of go over, but by and large, it's not a huge shift. Which, having said that now, that in itself could be a huge problem. There's definitely a divide in the balance community, or at least the people who would be in the balance community, over just kind of the way that the spec has felt for really a long time, going as far back as when Eclipse was first made, several expansions ago, and the kind of focus on the solar and lunar. And then, it's interesting because it feels like they're trying to shift away from it. Given things like, we're getting a lot more nature-y things and more traditional, and by traditional, I mean like Warcraft 3 traditional, kind of druidy things, right? So you got like, denizens of the dream to make a fairy dragon, and you can like make mushrooms, and you can like now, get a dryad to come help you out. And then of course there's like the very first things like, entangling roots, right? It doesn't really see any play outside of PvP and a few niche boss situations, but this might be one of the most iconic Druid abilities, and we don't even get to do it. We don't get to do anything with vines, right? We're just kind of all suns and all moons, and that's about it. But it seems like that's the way that they were going once, for sure anyway. Once we got hero talents, where we got a true kind of like this moon, lunary type thing. Cool, fine, awesome. But then Keeper of the Grove feels like it wants something other than Wrath and Sunfire, but we still have Wrath and Sunfire. And then our key talent for it, Force of Nature, which is a really cool ability. Like, I love to make the trees. It just doesn't really align with anywhere else in the spec. Like, if not for Keeper of the Grove, you could take Force of Nature out and it would have no impact on the overall feel of Balance as a gameplay. Okay, I'll come back around to all this, but let's just start by looking at some of the actual changes. So first, this is going to be one of the few specs in the game that actually got slightly more complex with this rework. I would not say that it has gotten pruned. If anything, it literally gained a button in Eclipse. So your Eclipse is now a button you press instead of something you cast into. It normally has one charge, but you got this button right here. It's right here. The cleverly named Improved Eclipse, which gives you a second charge, and you'll probably always get that. So casting this button, or pressing this button, it's going to send you into an Eclipse depending on what you most recently cast. So if I cast Wrath here, I can now go into a solar eclipse. And if I cast Starfire, instead I could go into a lunar eclipse. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put this chart up on the screen that was either made by Tettles or somebody around Tettles made it, but it's posted on Wowhead. And you can see sort of the general timing window of when you're going to want to be pressing the buttons and how often you'll be in Eclipse, as well as also including the Force of Nature windows should you be in Keeper of the Grove. All right, so what else is new? Well, Mastery has changed. It used to be that your Moonfire and Sunfire would increase the damage of all of your other damage of those types of things, increase your arcane and your nature damage, or at least the damage you dealt to them. I don't remember the exact thing, but the point is you'd have to dot everything with your dots. Now it just flat increases your damage. On one hand, this is simpler, and it's going to be a lot easier to get things going. You're still going to want to dot everything eventually, since that's damage you're otherwise losing out on, but you're no longer bound to it to at least get your damage started. Combined with the Eclipse, but really mostly thanks to the new Eclipse, you're going to be getting into your damage a lot faster than you did before. I think overall it's probably still going to feel like a slower ramp build-up spec, but we're definitely increasing the acceleration far more than from where we were at. Okay, there's a few other random talents here. Some things that aren't exciting, in fact, aren't exciting to a really bad degree. We have an example of like a talent down here, like Elun's Challenge. When you exit Eclipse with less than 40 astral power, Wrath and Starfire's cast times are reduced by 25% for 15 seconds or until you enter an Eclipse. It's probably interesting things you can do with that, at least in the slower windows. But interestingly, that encourages you to use all your astral power up. And there's some other talents that seem to want you to kind of pool your astral power, and that's a weird anti-synergy situation. We also have our Apex talent here. It's just exactly what you think it is. It's going to do a bunch of stuff for Eclipse. The first rank makes it so that your Starfire and Wrath are instant after you start an Eclipse, and then your Spenders, Star Surge, and Starfall do extra damage. This is, I think, an exact copy of a spell we had before, or a talent we had before, where your crits cause the target to take additional dot damage for a few seconds afterwards. And then finally, in this final rank, we do actually have some interesting visuals here. It basically makes it so that activating your Eclipse shoots these bolts out, either a solar bolt or a lunar bolt, depending on your Eclipse. And I'll go ahead and show you right here. In fact, I'm going to use an incarnation, and then if I can get out of the way of all this other testing happening on, you can see they kind of do these swirly traveling paths. So we'll shoot that, and you saw all the curly waves there heading out in different directions. So overall, that's at least kind of nice. Definitely a slight variation over the typical straight beams that we normally have, and I can appreciate that. So I think it's worth talking about, though, that kind of original question of, well, what's just going on with the spec at all? Why are we getting things that seem like we're being pushed in one direction, but not actually getting massive changes? Eclipse is so polarizing. What's going on here? Well, this is beside this particular remake. We actually know from a little interview with Ian Hazzikostas that, who's the lead designer of WoW, by the way, if you don't know that. So he said that once they had decided that this was the expansion, they wanted to do away with combat add-ons, which is controversial. Certainly, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm not a fan of combat add-ons, so I'm happy to see them go. But all that aside, they decided this was the expansion that they wanted to do that, and then once they did that, that also meant they needed to redesign every single spec in the game and make it so that it could be more approachable without add-ons. Not a super hard task for some of the more simple specs like Moonkin, but absolutely drastic for others like Outlaw, and that's before even considering the fact that there's some 44 specializations that need to be remade. Given all that they've done in just these few months, or however long they've been working on these, I mean, it is really incredible. But it also definitely makes sense that they're going to be really reluctant to how much they want to fully redesign something visually and mechanically, right? Now, I can't help but think that given what they've been releasing over the past several expansions, that they do want to move away, at least partially, from this lunar eclipse. I mean, just since Shadowlands, I want to say, so 2-ish, 3-ish, 4-ish expansions or so, we've gotten a mushroom, the gigantic mushroom, which unfortunately you don't really get to get in any more builds hardly anymore. We've actually had the trees since, I want to say, Burning Crusade, but they've always been a favorite, big lore favorite for a lot of people. Just this last expansion, we got the ability to get a fairy dragon. Just this last patch, we got the ability to get a dryad, right? We're getting all these cool, more nature-y oriented things. And that, you can't help but think that, well, we haven't gotten any new solar-based stuff other than, I mean, I don't even remember when we got Sunfire, right? I think also, too, when you think about all the different abilities that have been around for a long time and which ones are still standing the tests of time and which ones are not, I have to say that this is just not exciting. Wrath is not exciting. It's like a, I don't know, you're just shooting a weird yellow ball. It made sense in Classic WoW. It was green back in Classic WoW, and it was just nature damage, quote unquote. Right? That was a different time period. But in a world where you have demonology warlocks and now devourer spec for demon hunters, right? We're getting things that not only are more flashy and interesting and thematic, but just fit better in modern gameplay and have a real sort of intentional rotation around them. Wrath, and just really all of Balance Druid for the most part, feels like it's still hanging on to a lot of its early designs. And I can't help but wonder, and certainly I hope, that either this beta cycle just maybe they find the time, or if nothing else, at least by mid expansion or in the last Titan, that we have a different look at Balance Druid. Because I don't know, I'm tired of 3 different variations of Moonfire and having 2 buttons, and then also having a spec that oscillates between being completely useless in some scenarios and absolutely overpowered in AoE scenarios, and is impossible to balance. Look, it's even in the name, balance. They can't balance it. Yeah, I really love the idea of Keeper of the Grove, and I want to see it really shine and have a whole different look to Druid. And just in general, I want Balance to really get a new look. And I know I'm not alone out there. It just seems like that's what they want to do too. So make it happen.